Well, everyone, welcome to another edition of Sports Insider. I am Dan Labbe. He is Chris Fedor. This is Chris Fedor's flu game today, like Michael Jordan had way back in the day. We got a packed show. We're going to talk Browns with Tom Reed. We're going to talk Indians with Paul Hoynes, get caught up on the latest trade rumors and whatnot going on with the Tribe. And then we're going to wrap it up talking Big Ten championship game and college football playoff with Doug Lesmerises, our Ohio State beat reporter. As promised, though, let's bring in Tom Reed. Tom, how are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
All right, Tom. Quarterback decision. It was made. It was a little surprising. Mike Pettine decides to stick with Brian Hoyer. Were you surprised at all that he made that choice?
Not really. Just knowing Pettine, he just seems like I think that he wanted to stick with a veteran in this situation. I think that I don't know if this was the best place to put Johnny Manziel in as the starting quarterback. I think that we're going to see that here in the next couple weeks anyway. I think that they may have been just better served. Hoyer's got him this far. As much as he struggled, I think even some of the players in the room, especially the veterans, just felt that if you put Manziel in, it was kind of conceding the season, because I think Indianapolis would have eaten him alive.
When it comes down to it, Tom, how do you think Mike Pettine would respond to this? If Brian Hoyer does indeed give you the best chance to win on Sunday against Indianapolis, why is it that he's accounted for one passing touchdown in the last 47 drives? How do you explain that?
I think, again, you're going with a guy that's gotten you this far. Johnny Manziel, we watched Johnny, and again, Chris, I believe that Johnny Manziel is going to be the starting quarterback before the season's over. I just think that they don't want to make this change right now. They feel like it's a desperation move. There's very little precedent for it in the NFL. We just haven't seen it very often. I mean, Colin Kaepernick did it, but don't forget, Colin Kaepernick originally played out of necessity, not a choice. So I just think that they just feel that they're going to ride this out and let him play. There's no question. If you look at the numbers. I'll give you a better example for my thinking. I think the biggest indictment of Brian Hoyer in the offense was found twice in the third quarter of the Buffalo game. Once when they could not get them 30 yards, when they could have put the game away and gone 10-0. That's 17 times in the last 7 games the Browns have produced turnovers, and they've gotten 3 touchdowns out of it. Oh. But even more telling was on the next drive. Buffalo, trailing 3-0, absolutely having to win that game, goes for it on a 4th and 3 from their 37 with Kyle Orton as their quarterback. That just, to me, tells me how little fear they had in the Browns' offense.
Tom, is this more about Brian Hoyer and the confidence that Mike Pettine still has in him because of the 7 wins, or is this more about Johnny Manziel maybe is not ready to start an NFL game at this point?
I think the second part is what you're getting to. I think that again, if you put Manziel out there and they get run ruled against the Colts, and we know the Colts are going to score points, and Johnny goes out there and makes a couple plays, but also turns the ball over 3 or 4 times, that's not a good way to get things started in a game that they have to win. Now, if Hoyer goes out there and the same thing happens and they lose, I think that you could. There's a very real chance, at least by the game in Carolina, that Manziel goes in and plays, because they're going to be out of the playoff race. I feel. I mean, technically they still could be in it, but I think that you just give Johnny a lot more leeway. You don't worry about what the reaction in the room is. Some of the veterans, like Joe Thomas, have waited all this time to get this opportunity. I just think it's a safer play to let Hoyer. And, again, Brian played really well up until the time Mac broke his leg. And then ever since then, he's had a couple decent games, but he hasn't played nearly as well since then.
Tom, you mentioned the locker room, and no less than Joe Thomas came out and basically said if Johnny Manziel starts, it gives them the feel that they're giving up on the season. How much of a role do you think the room played in this decision?
I think it had a part of it, a small part of it. I think that Pettine is the type of guy that listens to, he's not a guy that's, he's going to listen to a little bit of everything. I mean, I still think he made the call in the end, but I'm sure they took that into account.
Looking at the Colts, this is a situation, Tom, where they're a really good offensive team, not so great defensively. This is one of those games where if the Browns fall behind 14-0, 21-0, it might be over. This is a notoriously slow starting Browns team. How important is it that Brian Hoyer comes out, firing and hitting passes? He's accurate. He's all the things he hasn't been over the last 3 or 4 weeks, really all season long. How important is it that he kind of rights those wrongs early?
Well, that, and you have to hope that, and they have not been able to run the ball consistently, but they've had a couple games where they've been able to run the ball. I think that Indianapolis is kind of exposed in the middle of the field with the run game. If they can get the run game going, it will mean so much to Brian Hoyer. The other thing Brian Hoyer has to start doing is spreading the ball around. When he was good early in the season, he was moving the ball around. Last couple of weeks, hey, who doesn't love Josh Gordon's talent? But they've relied way too much on Josh Gordon, and Josh Gordon has not shown that he's ready yet. In some ways, they're not on the same page. He's not, he's been running some wrong patterns that have led to a couple interceptions. I think he's got to get back to spreading the ball around. But the issue, of course, becomes is he's starting to run out of weapons. Miles Austin, who's had a really good season, is not going to be there. Gary Barnidge, we don't know is going to be there. We don't know if Jordan Cameron's going to be able to play, and he needs what he can give them. That's one of the things one of the many problems that the Browns are facing right now.
Tom, you mentioned Miles. How big of a loss is that going to be without him, and who's going to step into that role that he has been playing lately?
Well, that's a great question, Chris. I think he's been really good. I'll be honest with you, coming out of preseason, and you can say this about a lot of things about the Browns. Coming out of preseason, I just didn't see it. I wasn't quite sure. I was wondering if this guy could still play at his age, and just more with his injuries. But he's been very good. He made a lot of clutch catches for these guys. I think 34 of his 47 passes produced first downs for them. And he's really been good for Hoyer. And to not have him there, I think that's tough. I think you've got to get Taylor Gabriel back more involved in the offense. He's only been targeted twice in the last 2 games. And I think he was a very valuable contributor for this team earlier in the season, up until Josh Gordon came back. So I'd like to see him get a little bit more involved. Of course, the issue you have there is the size, but that was an issue before Josh was there. And now you have Josh, who's big, and the other 2 guys are smaller. I'd like to see Gabriel get more involved in the offense again.
Tom, head coach Mike Pettine has been asked the question over and over and over again, with the Browns' special teams continuing to struggle, why didn't the Browns go out and get Josh Cribbs? And I know what he said, and he had a lot of coach speak when he responded to those questions. In your opinion, the real reason Josh Cribbs is not a member of the Cleveland Browns is what?
I don't know. I would have absolutely thought to go get him. It's weird because one of Pettine's things he always says is, well, the guy's got to play another position. He can't just be a special teams player. But that's what Johnson Batamosi is. Yeah. Johnson Batamosi doesn't play on defense. He is strictly a special teams guy. I think I would have gone to go out and get him. Was his personality an issue, bringing him back into the locker room? I just can't think that couldn't have been overcome, because what they have right now is it's killed them. It's killed them all season. It's lost them some games.
Yeah, Tom, you kind of mentioned that personality and some of the, I guess you want to call them issues, and sometimes it's, Josh is all about Josh, but at the same time it would have been, 6 games. You've got to think that locker room and this coaching staff could handle that.
Yeah, I would think so. Again, he would certainly give you more than what you've had. And he's been pretty good for the Colts. Let's face it, he's been pretty good for the Colts so far. I think he's only got like something like 17 less yards in 2 games, and the Browns have all season in punt returns. I think it's like 62 yards. I think the Browns have 77 yards in returns this year. And Josh has like 61 in 2 games.
Tom, before we let you go, I want to go back to one thing you said. You mentioned that you believe Johnny Manziel will be the starting quarterback for this team before the end of the season. I think Chris and I would both agree with that. I'm wondering if you have a specific game in mind where you think maybe that could happen. Could it be as soon as next week?
It could be, but I think it's maybe more likely for the Carolina game. First of all, starting in some warm weather, and but I think that they may My guess is it would be the Carolina game. If you have a scenario where the Browns lose this week, but Hoyer isn't that bad, puts up 25, 30 points, I don't see, you can't take it. I don't know if you can take him out right after that. But I do think the Carolina game, if the Browns lose one of these next two games, is a spot where you could play him. Again, we have to see what all these other playoff scenarios, if the Bengals suddenly lose 2 or 3 in a row, then maybe that changes. But the way the course is going right now, I think we're going to see Manziel, and I would say the Carolina game.
All right, Tom Reed joining us on Sports Insider. Tom, appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Yep. All right, we will have Paul Hoynes on shortly. A surprise, to go with Brian Hoyer this week. I tend to think maybe that locker room had something to do with it, maybe more than we know. Because again, when Carlos Dansby says something, maybe it doesn't carry as much weight as Joe Thomas, an offensive player, a leader on this team for years and years, basically coming out and saying, starting Johnny Manziel is giving up on the season. Now, I disagree with Joe, but if he's speaking for the offense, if he's speaking for that group, I think as a head coach in a playoff race, you at least have to consider that in your decision.
Yeah, it's not fantasy football. You have to take those things into account. You have to take into account how the players are going to respond, how the coaching staff is going to respond. It's really easy in fantasy football to take Aaron Rodgers out of a lineup and put like Johnny Manziel in there because you really, really want rushing yards or something along those lines. But there are guys who have not been to this kind of point in their careers, and they still do have an outside chance at the playoffs. It's not a very good chance, and they made it a lot more difficult because they lost against Buffalo. But I think you do have to take those players' feelings into account.
All right, let's go ahead and talk some Indians. We'll bring in our Indians beat reporter here at cleveland.com, Paul Hoynes. Hoynesy, what's going on?
Hi, guys. How you doing?
Doing all right. The Indians suddenly in some rumors now, maybe interested in acquiring Brandon Moss from Oakland. Tell us a little bit about Moss.
Yeah, Moss is a corner guy, left field, first base, right field. He played, a bunch of different positions for the A's last year. Great first half. Went to the All-Star game, 21 homers, 66 RBIs in the first half. Then had some hip problems and really tailed off in the second half. Coming off hip surgery, right hip surgery. Oh. He had that in October. So, they've talked. They've been looking for, the Indians, said going into the offseason they wanted some help either at first base or one of the corner positions, first, third, left, right, and they needed some protection in case, either Ryan Rayburn or Nick Swisher have trouble bouncing back from knee surgery.
Hoynesy, to the best of your knowledge, were the Indians involved at all in Josh Donaldson?
They did talk to Donaldson. They did talk to the A's about Donaldson.
Okay.
I think they talked to him at the GM meetings. But at that time, they were told, and I think just about everybody else was told, that he was not available. That's what Billy Beane told them. Now, I think this was a deal. The Friday night deal last Friday, the deal that sent him to Toronto, really a surprising deal. I think from what I heard, the A's, targeted the Blue Jays and vice versa. Those are the two teams that they did it. And it wasn't like the A's circled back and talked to every team that had asked them about Donaldson, trying to sweeten the pot. I think they wanted what Toronto had to offer, and they made the deal. And I was thinking the same thing, that it matched perfectly with what the Indians could have given them. Brett Laurie, Chisenhall. You've got probably two young starters. You've got a young shortstop, Merrick Gonzalez. That would have kind of, was almost picture perfect.
Hoynesy, with the way this offseason is playing out, and there's still time, obviously, between now and spring training and now and the start of the year, but the way things are playing out, it seems like the Indians are going into next year. Offense isn't going to be great. They're going to rely on that pitching staff. They're going to rely on that bullpen and just pray that defense was an aberration last year.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see big changes, but I know they're talking trades with a lot of teams. I think that's a big focus coming up, next week in San Diego for the GM meetings. And I think they're talking to free agents as well. But it's a certain tier of free agents. It's not John Lester.
Hoynes, going back to Brandon Moss just for a second here. I'm looking at him. He's 31 years old. You mentioned it. He's coming off hip surgery. He's had really 3 great years, and that's about it because he bounced around early in his career. What kind of cost are we looking at to get a guy like this?
I think he made, I think he's arbitration eligible, so you're looking at a 1-year guy probably. He made like $4.1 million last year. So you're probably looking at a guy, coming off the hip surgery. He probably is going to, bump up maybe to $5-6 million, maybe $6 million. I don't know if the Indians are interested in talking multi-year deal with him. I guess it would depend. We'll get a clue if this deal goes through, what kind of players they give up. I mean, if they're pretty good players, I would think, they'd probably value this guy, and maybe they look at, down the road that maybe they could keep him. But I think, we'll have to see just how this, if and when this trade unfolds.
Hoynes, there's another name on a list of guys who could potentially get traded, and it might be more likely after what the Atlanta Braves did with Nick Markakis, a guy that's been on my radar for a long, long time, but I love Justin Upton. I love his pop. I love the fact that he's only 27 years old, still plenty young enough. If you're talking about that kind of guy, is that somebody that the Indians would have an interest in or no?
I think they definitely have an interest in. I just don't know if they can afford him. He's an expensive. He's gonna make some money. He's making money, a lot of money right now. I just wonder, can they afford this guy? I mean, they have talked to John Hart. They have talked to the Atlanta Braves. I think before they traded Haywood, who was it, Jason Hayward?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Before they traded him, I think the Indians were in on those conversations at the GM meetings, and but Upton just sounds very, very expensive to me. I can't see that happening right now, but who knows? I mean, I would think, I know that they are in on a lot of players, and they always are, and this is a busy time of year, and 99% of the conversations don't bear fruit.
You mentioned that the Indians are in on a lot of players, Hoynes. All bats, or are there some pitchers mixed in there too?
There's pitchers as well. They're trying to add some depth to the starting rotation. I don't know if the Moss deal goes through. I would think they'd probably have to give up an arm there, maybe a pitcher or so. I'm not sure. It sounds like Oakland is rebuilding a little bit.
Yeah.
They've gone to the postseason 3 straight years. It sounds like Billy Beane has decided this team isn't going to go any farther, and as he's done in the past, he starts rebuilding right, when he thinks that team has hit the wall. And it looks like that might be going on in Oakland again. So, they're going to be looking for young infielders, middle infielders. They're going to be looking for, young pitchers that are almost major league ready. I don't know if the Indians would give up a Zach McAllister. I don't know if they'd even consider Salazar. I can't see that. But there are some, they do have some young pitching prospects, the guys that they just added to the 40-man that might be in play here.
Hoynes, you mentioned, maybe they're looking to add depth to that pitching staff, and obviously this pitching staff was very strong at the end of last year. But when you look at it realistically, you're still counting on guys like Carlos Carrasco, Danny Salazar, Trevor Bauer, guys that don't have real long track records. So does this pitching staff still need kind of a veteran arm, a guy that they can rely on at least for a few months until they know that these young pitchers are going to work out?
I think that's a good point, Dan. You saw him bring in Aaron Harang last spring in February. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in a guy like that again. In fact, I would bet on it that they bring in kind of a veteran guy on a minor league deal. Maybe they could, I know, when the Cubs traded Samaja to Oakland during the season, the Indians had talked to the Cubs about Hamill. Hamill's out there as a free agent. I don't know if he would be in play, if what kind of money he's looking for. I think the pitching market is going to loosen up after Lester signs wherever he's going, so we'll see there. But that's a name to remember as well.
All right, Paul Hoynes on Sports Insider, our Indians beat reporter. Hoynes, appreciate you taking the time out.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so the Indians, at least in talks, that's kind of how it goes every year. We kind of hear that the Indians are in on talks. We'll see if anything actually comes of it. You got to think if anything happens, though, Chris, it's going to be one of those, right before spring training, late in spring training editions, guys that are still just kind of hanging out there looking for work.
And Dan, that Moss thing, it makes me a little bit nervous. I kind of alluded to it there with Hoynesy, but 31 years old, coming off hip surgery, only really 3 strong years under his belt. Unfortunately, that's the kind of guy that the Indians usually target.
Yeah, and they've had some success with it in the past, and train wrecks also.
That's true.
So it'll be.
They've had some success, and then they've had Nick Swisher.
Yeah, that too, and he's also a left-handed bat, which
that's
right.
true.
That's exactly what the Indians need: more lefties. All right, let's talk about some Big Ten championship games, some Ohio State football, with part of our Ohio State team, our Ohio State beat reporter Doug Lesmerises. Doug, how are you?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
We're doing well. Ohio State getting ready for the Big Ten championship game against Wisconsin, and they will be starting Glenville's own Cardale Jones in that game with J.T. Barrett getting hurt. Who is Cardale Jones? I saw him play in high school. I haven't really seen him play since, aside from some mop-up duty with the Buckeyes. Who is this guy?
Yeah, I mean, we've written like 5 stories on Cardale Jones this week because that's what everybody wants to know. I mean, they want to know, who is Cardale Jones? He's like a big – he looks the part. He's like 6'5", 250. He looks like, Cam Newton or Ben Roethlisberger are one of those guys. His probably biggest highlight this year was hurdling a tackler. I mean, he's just kind of he's got a lot of pieces. He just has never done this before. He's a guy, he's actually was the same high school class as Braxton Miller. So he's a redshirt sophomore, but he went to prep school for a fall, and then he redshirted when he got here. So he got like 2 classes behind Braxton Miller. He was a guy who really wanted to come to Ohio State, did certainly have other options in recruiting, and just has never done it. I think all of this is less about Cardale Jones and more about the situation of having any third-string quarterback making his first career start in a conference championship game. That's, for quarterback X, that's a very difficult situation.
So how do you think Urban Meyer is going to play this, Doug? Is he going to show the same kind of confidence that he showed in J.T. Barrett, or is the offensive game plan going to change and it's going to be more about Ezekiel Elliott and maybe hope that his defense comes up big?
I think they have to get a little bit creative. For how good J.T. Barrett has been, and you cannot dispute how good J.T. Barrett has been, he was not great early.
Right.
They lost their second game of the year in part because J.T. Barrett was still learning on the job. Now, the difference is the offensive line was still learning on the job. A lot of the young skill players were still learning on the job. They were all growing up together. Those other guys, Cardale Jones is stepping into a more experienced team around him. But, Cardale Jones, who knows? If he had a month, if he had 4 games, he might be in a very different spot. But, J.T. Barrett wasn't really, quote, ready right away, not ready to be great. So I think they have to get creative. I think we're going to see Jalen Marshall, the H-back, who was a high school quarterback, who's played some Wildcat quarterback this year. I think we'll see more of that. I think they'll try to lean on Ezekiel Elliott in the run game, but I think Wisconsin's going to try to make Ohio State throw. So I think they're going to have to get a little creative in trying to get the ball to people without just putting it all on Cardale Jones.
Doug, one noticeable thing about Cardale Jones is he's a big guy, 6'5", 250 pounds. I mean, J.T. Barrett and Braxton Miller aren't small guys, but they're not that big. Does that help Ohio State at all? Does that mean they can do anything maybe a little different with Cardale Jones they couldn't do with those other guys?
Yeah, it's interesting because they also talk about what a huge arm he has. Everyone talks about he can, throw it 70 yards, he can throw it through a wall, but it's like, well, what's that going to mean on the field for helping him play better? JT Barrett, we talked to him yesterday for the first time since his injury. He was actually talking about how with Cardale Jones, Cardale can see over the line a little bit better. That will maybe help him a little bit. JT has to work a little bit harder to maybe see everything develop. But what JT Barrett has done best in this offense is be a distributor and hit people in stride and do the kind of things that you don't have to be tall or have a huge arm to do. So, Cardale Jones has a huge arm. Are they going to mean he's going to throw it downfield 10 times? I think that's a way for Ohio State to lose, trying to do that too much. So, it's interesting. If Ohio State's used to having running quarterback here, Cardale Jones can run, but he's not quite as elusive as a guy like Braxton or even as JT. So, there's a lot of questions on how it's all going to unfold.
Doug, obviously all the focus is on the Big Ten title game against Wisconsin, but there's the bigger picture. There's the College Football Playoff Committee and how Ohio State is going to be viewed after this injury to JT Barrett. Should it affect how Ohio State is viewed, knowing that they're not the same team that they were a couple of weeks ago?
I think the committee was smart. They said it did not affect their placement of Ohio State this week. Ohio State is 5 with no consideration given to JT Barrett's injury. They're going to let it play out on the field. And so, as basically these teams have done all year, you're playing 2 games. You're playing the game to win on the field because if you don't win, the second game doesn't matter. But the second game is you're playing to impress. So they have to beat Wisconsin or the playoff is out. But they're also playing against TCU and playing against Baylor and trying to impress the committee if they do win. And so, a 17-16 win where the quarterback situation looks iffy, that will have an impact on Ohio State, I think. So I don't know that it's specifically backup quarterback injury. It's more just how you look in this game, knowing that JT Barrett is gone, but if you prove that the offense is still very functional, they'll be fine. But they are playing 2 things at once on Saturday.
Doug, the playoff committee raised some eyebrows with their rankings this week, dropping Florida State down to number 4. This is a team that hasn't lost in 2 years. And a lot of people looked at that and said, how can you do that after they win? And they've won so many games in a row, which is a really difficult thing to do. What did you think of that?
I thought it was a little odd. I thought it was a bad sign for Ohio State that TCU is now at 3 instead of at 4. There's no way Ohio State's going to pass Florida State. They're not going to take Florida State and put them out of the playoff altogether as an undefeated team. So Ohio State still is competing with TCU, which is now 2 spots away. The thing that I think has to be remembered in all these discussions is that while the committee gets in a room together and they discuss things for a day and a half, they end up voting. They do vote. There are ballots. And I'm just throwing out a speculative example. But we don't know, for instance, if maybe there are 2 people on the committee who just do not like Florida State, who just do not like their body of work, and are putting Florida State, let's say, 8th each week. And everybody else on the committee has Florida State ahead of TCU, but those 2 ballots are dragging down Florida State. You know what I mean? Like, they have a complicated process, but every week Jeff Long, committee chairman, gets up there and explains the result. But we don't know the individual ballots. We don't know the individual discussions. And you have to remember, Jeff Long has to explain the result. He might not agree with it. There might be a lot of people in that room who don't agree with TCU being ahead of Florida State, but there might be a couple people whose votes are influencing it greatly.
Does it set a bad precedent? And obviously not all wins are equal in college football, but does it have the potential to set a bad precedent when maybe winning takes a little bit of a backseat, as it seems to have in this case?
I think there could be a good precedent with it, explaining that strength of schedule matters. I think that's a good thing if that message gets across, whether it's to Baylor in their non-conference schedule, whether it's to a team like Florida State or Ohio State with your conference schedule, the idea that your conference has to be good from top to bottom to provide good opponents for a team. I think it's a good message that strength of schedule matters. It does make me a little nervous, though. I mean, I think in the end, and I haven't written about this, I've been talking about this, if the 2002 Ohio State team was being judged by a committee in this way,
Right.
where would they be? You know, everybody loves Holy Buckeye, but I don't know what the committee would think of a 14-9 win over Purdue at the end of the game. You know what I mean? Like, people love that Ohio State team because they found a way to win, even though a lot of weeks it wasn't pretty. Florida State's finding a way to win, and they're sort of being, you know, they're dropping as they're doing it. So I do agree with you. I'm a little nervous about the idea that winning, in the end, you know, winning is the thing, and it's being not devalued, but it's being sort of looked at in a little different way.
All right, Doug, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Doug Lesmerises, our Ohio State beat reporter. I don't know, man. Going 2 years undefeated, that's hard to do. And I know that maybe that last win wasn't as impressive, but and I'm certainly not a Florida State guy, but yeah, right. Boy, it's tough. You got to think about how hard it is to go 2 years without losing a single game.
And the other thing, Dan, if I saw something correctly, of the teams that are being discussed here in the top 5, strength of schedule favors Florida State. They've had the best strength of schedule of any team. Now, it doesn't seem like that because they don't have that big signature win, but at the time they played Notre Dame, people have to remember Notre Dame was a top 10 team. Louisville was a top 25 team.
Yeah.
They're going to be playing Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech just beat Georgia this past weekend. Georgia Tech is a top 15 team. So I think a lot of people are looking at how Florida State is winning, not necessarily the team that they're playing against. And I think what should matter, first of all, is wins. Second, it should be strength of schedule. And then way down the line is how you perform in said game.
Yeah.
It's not easy to win in college football.
And every game plays out differently. Matchups are different.
Right.
It's really difficult to judge just based on a final score.
And this is a Florida State team that lost one of their best defensive players last year. Lost their best wide receiver, Kelvin Benjamin. He's playing in the NFL right now. Lost the starting center. Their left tackle is now playing center. There have been a lot of things that Jameis Winston and the Noles have had to deal with. And for them to be undefeated in a power conference, it is a power conference, to drop them down is just idiotic to me.
All right, that will do it for another edition of Sports Insider. Thanks to Tom Reed, Paul Hoynes, Doug Lesmerises for joining us. He's Chris Fedor. I'm Dan Labbe. Thanks for watching.